All right, so let's talk about the idea of text again. And I'll breeze over it more quickly today because we had introduced it on Monday, right? Text is one of those things that you will likely want to put in your drawing template as we move through the semester, right? And it's helpful to put in your drawing template because when you start a new project, it's one of those things that you always have to use in drawings, right? Text is all over our construction drawing set. And if you don't have it in your template, every single time you start a brand new assignment or you start a new drawing project, it's another step that you have to perform before you actually start the task that you are trying to achieve, right? So this is one of those things that would really benefit you being in your drawing template. Okay, so I'm going to say that. Our text tool is located on the Annotate tab in the ribbon here, right? You remember this? So we have our Home tab, we have Insert, we have Annotate. We have multi-line text and single-line text, right? We talked about that last time. Over here, if we click on this little drop down here, we have in gallery style, we have our predefined text styles, okay? If I click on this little flyout menu down here at the bottom of the Annotate or the text toolbar on the Annotate tab, it's a tongue twister. If I click on that little flyout, then the text style editor box pops up, okay? Now, again, we define these text styles so that when we begin a project, we have text that is the right size, it's the right font, it's the right orientation, right? It's the right width factor, and it's the right size to print, okay? And again, we do that so that we don't have to continually create text over and over again. We create a style so that it's set and we can use that text every time we begin a task, okay? So this CAD file that I have open back here, I'm going to create some text in this CAD file, and this might look familiar because this is the start of one of your assignments that's posted on Canvas, okay? And I found this on our CAD Common, right? So if we go to this PC and we come over here to CAD Common, Arch, 1310, and Drawings, all the way down here in the T's, we have text justification and text style. Those are going to be the two files you're going to start your text assignments with. Okay, so if you don't have those, take them with you. But just in case, I've also posted them within your assignment on Canvas, right? And I try to not forget to do that, just in case. So I'll be creating some text in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create 3 different text styles, and then we're going to implement them onto this page here. And then we're going to see how they function with regards to paper space, right? So we're going to draw our text in model space, and we are going to print it in paper space, right? Kind of our normal workflow. All right. Now, I'm just going to blame this again. I blame a lot of things on Jeff Plant, but this is one of Jeff Plant's old files, and so I'm hoping that we don't have any trouble with annotated text in it, just because it's likely several years old, right? If we do, I'll just start a new file, and we'll move forward from there. Tends to happen sometimes anyway, you know, when you're working professionally, so it's somewhat good to run into issues maybe, learn how to deal with them. Okay, so let's create some text, and the assignment here is to create a text style that is Arial type 8, and we're going to create our name and put an address here. That's essentially what we're going to do, okay? And if I look at my book, the size of the text for the Arial style, I think it's going to be 3, let's see, for the Arial 8, it's going to be 1/8 inch tall. So I want to create Arial style 8 text, and I want it to be 1/8 inch tall, all right? So again, I'm going to come over here to my Annotate tab. I'm going to click on my text style flyout because that's where I'm going to define the text style, right? The text style is Arial 8 and it's an 1/8 inch tall, okay? So I'm going to click on New. I'm going to give it a name. We're going to call it Arial 8. We'll make it easy. And I'm going to type out 8th, E-I-G-T-H. Because AutoCAD won't let me put a slash in my 1/8 inch if I were to put numbers, and I don't like that. So we call it Arial 8. Okay. Good. So by doing just that, that operation, I've created my new text style, and now it's up to me to define it, right? So I'm going to come over here to my font. I'm going to click on the down arrow here, and I'm going to find Arial. It should be the very top here. Let's see, just regular old Arial. There's Arial. And I'm going to make sure it's annotative, right? We have kind of the old way of doing text in AutoCAD, which we talked about last time, and we have the new way, which is annotative, right? Everybody's sort of trending towards annotative. The old way was kind of the manual way, where you had to figure out the size of the text that you're creating. You had to figure out the size of text you were creating above and beyond it being an 1/8 inch printed, right? With annotative, AutoCAD figures that out for you, right? We kind of discussed that. So we're going to make sure that our annotative box here is checked. Click. And then in this paper text height, we're going to type in how tall we want that text to print at, right? So that's going to be 1/8 of an inch. Okay, and we're going to hit apply. And we're going to set that current. Click. And right now we're going to close out of that.
So it keeps changing it from an 1/8 to a quarter.
Ah, yes. Is that happening to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, rookie mistake, right? All right, the reason that it's changing your font from an 1/8 to a quarter is because your precision is set so that it's not set to a tolerance that will recognize that likely, right? So if you go into units and hit enter, that's a really good illustration of why we changed the precision in AutoCAD, okay? Did mine change to a quarter? It did? I didn't even notice. I typed in an 1/8. So the reason that's happening is because under my units, I have a 1/4 of an inch set for precision, right? And at the very beginning of the semester, when we talked about starting AutoCAD, you know, this needs to be architectural, precision needs to be at a minimum 1/16, 1/32 is even better. And that 1/32 will allow you to make line segments and different geometries and text to a 1/32 of an inch height, okay? What you found there was that if you wanted to create some text that was 1/64 of an inch, it would bump it up to a 1/32 because the precision will only allow that level of detail. Okay. Yep.
Sorry, where's units?
You just type units at the command line. Yep. Nope. It's good. Oh, and I think I just lost it there. There we go. Okay. You can type units at the command line. You can go to the application menu, the big A, and go down to options, right? And you can find it there. But I think the easiest way to do it is just type units. Okay. 1/8. Yep. And let me redefine mine. Maybe it redefined itself. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and create some text. And I have the option to use multi-line text or single-line text, right? Multi-line text, we talked yesterday, is more of a paragraph type format, right? Where if we look at our drawings over here, it's going to be used for things like general notes, right? So places where we have really big blocks of text like this right here, that's what we're going to use multi-line text for, right? These are really tiny, but for things like labeling rooms where we have kind of one single string of text, right? We're going to use single-line text to do that. This is kind of a special case, right? We're somewhat addressing an envelope or a piece of paper on the page here, right? I don't really need a paragraph, but I'm going to have 3 separate strings of text that I need to input. And so using single line text will be appropriate in this application. So I'd click on the down arrow, I can click on single line text. The command line input for single line text is just the word text, T-E-X-T, enter. Okay. Now, before I start my text, because we have annotative text that we're using, annotative text means that within model space, when I create my text, AutoCAD automatically makes it larger or smaller according to the size of text I want to achieve in paper space, right? It's kind of, we were just talking about this. This is a really complicated topic. It's really kind of hard to grasp, right? But the idea is that we have some large objects in paper space here, or in model space here, right? We draw homes that are 400 feet by 400 feet. And if you put a piece of text that's 1/8 of an inch tall in next to this 400 foot by 400 foot house, right? It's going to be tiny. It's going to be microscopic. You won't be able to see it. You have a scale issue, right? So in order for it to be viewable and scalable, we have to size it up so that when paper space translates it down to scale, it's the right size printed, okay? So when you create your text in model space, AutoCAD may say, you know, to have an 1/8 inch text, when you print, it actually has to be 10 inches tall, so that when I scale it down by 48 times, right, to achieve a 1/4 of an inch scale, that it's the right size. I'll let that sit for a minute, right? It's really complicated. It's not complicated. It's just something that is not intuitive, maybe, right? I think one of the biggest questions I get from beginning AutoCAD students is, you know, I created this text and it's supposed to print at 1/8 of an inch, and it does print at 1/8 of an inch, but in model space, it's 4 feet tall. I'm like, well, yeah, because it's scaled at a 32nd of an inch. So we have to scale it down, right, from a bigger size to make it look scaled to print the right size when it's in paper space. Okay. So the way our AutoCAD functions to do that is we use our annotative text. Now, I've created my annotative text style, right? I need to come down here and I need to set my annotative scale of model space. I'm going to click on this. See, it says annotation scale of the current view. I'm going to click on this arrow here. And we are going to, well, actually, I think we're going to leave that at 1:1 because we're going to scale this at 1:1. So that's good for now. If it had been an 1/8 inch scale, right, we were scaling it to 1/8 of an inch, then I would have chosen 1/8 inch scale. If I were scaling it at 1/4 of an inch, I would have chosen 1/4 inch, right? So whatever scale you're scaling this at, you will change that setting. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my text. I'm going to click on single line text, okay? I'm going to make sure that the text style that I want to use is in my text style dialog box right here, or menu. So I'm going to drop down. Of course, it's already showing, but if it hadn't been showing, I would have clicked on Arial 8, okay? And I'm going to click on Justify down here in my command line. Justify. And I want to start creating some text here. So if you look at your book on page 2-24, you know, there's some text there. It says John Doe, 1198 East Main Street, Sandy, Utah, 84094. Okay. And so we're going to just type that same text in here. So I clicked on Justify. This corner of the text is the bottom left corner, right? You see that? We talked about how we have all these different types of justifications that we can achieve. So we have left, center, right, align, middle, fit, top left, top center, top right, middle left, middle center, middle right, bottom left, bottom center, bottom right. You get really quick with them when you've done this a long time. So I'm going to click on bottom left, BL, enter also, click. AutoCAD down here at the command line is going to say specify the bottom left point of the text, click. Specify the rotation angle. Well, we just want it to be flat text, right? So we're going to leave the 0 as default and hit enter. And we're going to type in our text. So I'm going to type in John Doe. This is the defining moment, right? If everybody gets this first string of text right, then we're good. Good?
How do you just type into the command line justify to get to that where it shows you like bottom?
So if you want to do it quick, you type text, enter, J, enter, and then, you know, BL, bottom left, enter. So do it real quick at like 10 keys. Good. Let's get the text going. Once you do this, I mean, it sounds very complicated when you say it out loud, but once you do it 4 times, you'll be good. Yep.
Yeah, can bring up the whole form and function.
Okay.
So just put single one.
Yep. It says J for J, enter. And then there should just be BL, or just click on BL. And then click on your bottom left corner. Yep. And angle 0, enter. There we go. Good. All right. So John Doe. Now, if I wanted to add more text to this string of text that I've created, I could just keep typing, or I could hit enter, right? Single line text is a little bit deceiving in its name because it actually will allow you to create multiple lines of text. It's just not in paragraph format, right? Okay, so I'm done here. I could hit enter, enter, and finish. I could also come over here and click on my next line, right? And I could type the address, 1198 East Main Street.
That it's not as well aligned.
Right. Yes. It won't allow you to snap to the bottom corner, right? Which is what you're finding. So I can do it this way. I could also click and delete, and I could hit enter. You remember that if we, oh, I just deleted the last one. Hold on, let me undo that. Oh, redo. Sorry, guys. Oh, I killed my text. Let me do it one more time. Single line text. J for justify, enter. BL, enter. For bottom left, click, enter, enter, enter. John Doe, right? Now, this is something you see me do a lot, and we've talked about it. You know, I completed this string of text. If it's a line, it's a line, a rectangle. But if I hit enter again after I execute a command, it immediately starts that exact same command up again, right? So if I type J, enter, BL, bottom left, enter, click, enter, right? You get real quick at it. 1198 East Main Street. Enter, enter. You know, and you're thinking, well, this is somewhat of a paragraph. Why didn't I just use multi-line text to do this? Because I could have done 3 strings of text, right, in the same text box. Well, if I had done that, I wouldn't get probably quite the alignment I wanted, right? So it's better to do a bottom left justification to hit that point exactly. So text, enter, justify, enter, BL, enter, click, enter, Sandy, comma, Utah, 84094, enter, enter. Ooh, I think oh, did you see I rotated it? I did a little mistake there. And you see my rotation? Isn't that nice? South, that's exactly it, right? So when I rotated it, I must have accidentally hit S in the wrong place. I rotated it south, and look, it rotated it a southward direction. The system works, people. The system works, right? Okay, so how do I fix that? Well, I could select it, I could delete it. I could also, right, we know the rotate command, RO, enter, select, enter. I can click and rotate it back up.
Yay!
And it works, okay? Let's do one more of these. I'm going to do city blueprint down here, and then it's 84094. Yep. In fact, let me pull up that. I'm going to pull up the digital book here real quick. Where is it? Here we go. Cat Common. We're going to go to Arch 1310. Draw, or no, that's not what we want. Downloads. There we go. And this is page 2-24. There we go. Okay, so that's our first one, right? And when I look at these, right, I like to talk about, you know, points. When I look at them, I just make sure that, you know, that this is actually an Arial type font, right? I open up your text dialog box and I see that I have Arial, I have regular, 1/8 inch, that it's annotative, looks good, right? I also look at alignment. If these are all on here and they're aligned at the bottom left, looks good to me, right? Okay, we'll do one more, we'll move more quickly through this, right? And then what I'd like to do is start looking at dimensions. Or maybe we'll do a little bit of drawing. Should we do a little drawing first, maybe? We'll do a little bit of drawing. We'll break it up, right? Not too much annotation in one day. All right, let's do a city blueprint, okay? So this is the third, you know, portion of this assignment. I'll let you finish the second piece right here. We're going to create another text style, and it's going to be called City Blueprint, and the height is going to be 3/32 of an inch, right? So if I look in my book here, right, this is the assignment, and here are the instructions. So this is City Blueprint, and it's 3/32 of an inch tall, right? And of course, your precision would have to be set correctly in order to achieve that. So to create another text style, I'm going to come up here to my text style dialog box, click. I'm going to click on new. We'll give it a new name. We'll call this one, what will we call this one? City Blue. And it will be 3/32. Okay. I know that my text is annotative as opposed to kind of the manual type text, because if you look over here in the current styles that we have here, you see we have the one we just created, Arial 8, right, and City Blueprint, and they have these little scaled markers next to them, right? Those are the annotative markers. So that visual cue right there lets me know that those have been created the correct way. This text style right here that says standard, right? That doesn't have one of those by it, so I know that that's not annotative.
Why haven't we put numbers in the
You can, I spell it out because you can't put a slash in your increment, right? So 3/30 seconds. AutoCAD's very, very strict about their naming. So we come up with methods to get around it, right? I'm going to change this to City Blueprint. And the text height is going to be 330 seconds, right? 330 seconds. Apply. I'm going to set it current.
Had an angle.
You have an angle on yours?
45.
Oh, 45. Let's see. You're right. We have an oblique angle of 45. You're right. So right here, our oblique angle, that'll give it like an italics, right? I type in 45. Kind of hurts my eyes. I don't like that very much. Apply, set current, and there's our city blueprint, right? Close that out, and we'll create the text down here as well. And again, this is annotative. Yep.
My text height still wants to be 1.8.
Is it because your precision is set not fine enough?
Do we just set our precision at 1/32?
Yeah, I think it's safe to do that. Yeah, I think it's solid. No, it's a system setting, so if you change it one time, it will remember. And I say that when I mean at your house, because in the lab here, people are messing around with computers all the time and things get changed a lot. So I would say generally it should be a one-time deal, but it would be something I would check if there's a problem. Okay. Good. Okay, so we're gonna do the bottom left again, right? So I'm gonna type text, and there's always 3 or 4 ways to initiate a command in AutoCAD. One is not more right than another, right? I've said it about 18 times that I like to type. I like to type all my commands in by hand, right? My husband, also an architect, right? He's a button guy. He likes to have every button up on his screen, and he clicks buttons. There's not a right or wrong way, right? So if you want to come up here and click on single line text, great. If you want to type in text, enter at the command line, that's great as well. J for justify, or you could come down and click. J, enter. BL, bottom left, enter. Click, enter. Oh, did you see what I did? I think I had a rotation, 0, right? It was still set at south. It remembered last time that I had it set at south. 0, enter, and we'll type in John Doe. Enter, enter. Enter again, that reinitiates the command, right? Part of learning AutoCAD is not only learning AutoCAD, you know, being very precise with AutoCAD, but getting very quick at AutoCAD, right? So you can draft very quickly. And doing things like when you finish a command, instead of going up and clicking down and finding the command again, just hitting enter, right? And it reinitiates it and you can continue drafting. So justify, enter, BL, enter, click.
When I hit enter, it just goes down like a paragraph, but I am in single line.
What's that? Oh yeah, you can still hit, if you hit enter again though.
Oh,
If
okay.
it yep. Okay, so we've got same address, 1198 East Main Street. This text is really throwing me off, right? This doesn't feel right. Enter, enter. Oh, I misspelled something. Do you all remember how we can edit text if we make a mistake? That's it, yep. Double click on it really fast. M-A-I-N, click out, there we go. We have one more to do, so T-E-X-T, enter, J, enter, BL, enter. I click the bottom left, click, enter, Sandy, Utah, 84094, enter, enter. Great. Okay. So now, right, when I go over here to my layout tab, which is paper space, and I'll let you finish this up, right? When I print this, let's look at how we deal with annotative text and printing. And I'm going to say this, right? This is kind of I'm going into a lot of detail with all of this because all of these same principles for the annotative text, they apply to annotative dimensions, right? So you're going to create an annotative dimension type. You are going to set your annotative scale in model space for your dimensions. And then when you go to print in paper space, the viewport that you create will be specific to the scale of your dimension, right? So all of these same things that we're talking about with text are kind of doing double duty on dimensions as well. All right, I have my page here, right? We're getting some good practice doing page sizes in paper space. Control P. This needs to be an 8.5 by 11 inch portrait piece of paper. So I'm going to choose my plotter. We'll do Adobe PDF, letter, extents, right? You guys are probably old pros at this by now. Center the plot. We want this to be a 1:1 scale. We want to use our LaserJet CTV. That is one mistake that not everybody's doing it, but if your drawings print and the lines are color, okay, you haven't used your LaserJet CTV file to print on your assignments, okay? Such an easy thing to do, and easy points to lose, right? So if you print your PDF and you post it to Canvas and you have colored lines, you get points off. We want black and white lines with pen weights. And to make that happen, remember we have to use our LaserJet CTV file right here, okay? I want this portrait. I'm going to hit Apply to Layout. Okay, now if I cancel out of there, I've just set my page up so it will print an 8.5 by 11. Okay, this is my viewport. I'm gonna, oh, because your page layout is controlling that. You made a page layout. Yeah. So now if you so hit cancel. So right there to set current. So that's your page setup for that. So if you want to maybe like a landscape, if you know that one, you're good.
I don't know what exactly I did differently, but it's not in
No, it's okay. You're good. You're good. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's saying it's going to the extent of that page.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not that you're overlapping.
So it still applies to layout?
Yep. Okay. So we're going to create a viewport here, and of course, you know, I'm just going to drag this viewport was the default one. I'm going to drag it to the extent of my drawing here. Got a lot of steps, right? But so that my viewport doesn't print, I'm going to create a viewport layer that is non-printable. So, you know, lots of steps. You'll remember these when you get moving in AutoCAD pretty well. I'm going to go to my layer properties. I'm going to click on new layer here. And we'll call this viewport. We don't want our viewport to print because we don't want it mistaken for building geometry in a set of construction drawings that gets built, right? There's thousands of lines in a set of construction drawings, and if a viewport prints, it can be mistaken for something else. I'm going to click on non-print. There we go. I'm going to grab my viewport, drop down, make sure it's on the right layer. Looks pretty good. Okay. We have a couple of more steps, right? I'm going to grab my viewport here. I'm going to scale it, right? All of our drawings need to be scaled so that we can measure them. We don't want them just to be fit to the page unless specifically told to do so, because we want them to be quantifiable, right? So they have to be scaled.
Why did you make it non-printable?
When I was in my layer properties dialog box here, I created a viewport layer, and I clicked on this little printer right here. I slashed through it. You see that? And by doing that option, it made that layer non-printable. And now I just have to make sure my viewport's on that layer. Okay. So this drawing's going to be printed at 1:1 scale, right? It's an 8.5 by 11. It's being printed 1:1. So I grab my viewport, drop down. We'll do a 1:1 scale. Zooms it in. Okay. and it looks really great, right? One thing I want you to remember, and this is going to be something that will trick you if it happens to you. You know, you're working on your assignment at midnight, trying to get it done, and you go to print, you've created your text, you created your text styles, everything looks great, you scale your viewport, and your text goes away, right? And everybody panics. And I only laugh because I've been there, right? If I grab my viewport and I change it from 1:1 scale to maybe 1/16th, number one, that's not right, but a lot of stuff disappears and it doesn't look quite right, right? And the reason it's doing that is because when we created our text here, right, we set the annotation scale 1:1, right? And that will filter 1:1 text height in the viewport, right? And I made the example on Monday of a floor plan, right? If you have a floor plan that's scaled at 1/4 of an inch is equal to a foot, and you need to put a bunch of annotation on it, right? It's all of that annotation is scaled at 1/4. Now, if you have an enlarged floor plan on the same plan that's scaled at 1/2 inch, you'll also, on top of that 1/4 inch annotation, have 1/2 inch annotation, right? And you don't want it all to show up in the same place. You want to be able to filter out annotation that fits one scale, you know, in a viewport, and annotation that fits another scale in another viewport. So, you know, again, another one of those really nice things about annotated text is that you can filter, you know, the scale of the objects through the viewport. So I don't see everything that, you know, I guess my point is the viewport only shows the scale it's set to, okay? So I go to layout, I grab this and I change it back to 1:1, and there we go. It's all back to where it needs to be. There you go, right? One down, one down. Well, you still have a little bit of text that I didn't do, right? Then we would Control P, we would preview this, we'd look at our PDF. When I get these PDFs, I look at them. If they look like this, right, I can look at it and say it's 1:1 scale, right? If, by chance, I get something that looks like this, right, and there's a boundary somewhere, but in this case it's only on one side, but if this boundary were all the way around, I would know this drawing was not to scale and that you chose fit to paper. Yep.
So my viewport is not tall and skinny, it's like a square. I don't know
How to make it larger? Let's look at that. Right, so your viewport was the default viewport, right? It looked like somewhat like this, right?
Well, I mean, my entire feature space is a square.
Yeah,
It's
that's the
not
same
tall
as
and
mine.
Oh, yes, yes. So you have the same thing happen probably. Okay. So let's look at that. I think you missed the step when I did it. Your page size is not the right orientation, right? So what is happening there is you have it set to landscape, right? If I click on landscape and I hit apply to layout and I preview it, you see what it looks like? I'm going to hit escape. If I change that to portrait and I hit apply to layout, that work? Okay. And then, of course, you all know by now, you can just take the viewport and you can resize it to whatever it needs to be, right? Okay. Now, you know, I kind of moved the viewport around. I may have engaged the viewport. So I'm not entirely sure this drawing is to scale anymore. And again, we want to make sure these are to scale. It's kind of like the #1 most important thing, right? So I'm going to grab my viewport again and just verify the scale is correct. 1:1. Looks really good.
How do we make sure the viewport doesn't print again?
You're going to go to the layer properties and you're going to make sure that printer is slashed right there. Oops. Oh, you're hit escape. Okay, so what's happening here? You're just kind of trying to make this the exact same size as your page. That makes sense? You're almost there. Here we go. Okay, you grab that now. Ah, there's the problem, I think. Did it pop up? just like kind of like complex settings. And it's working because your text is showing up. All right. All right, now, if I wanted to create some text that was set at 1/4 of an inch, right? So I have a specific height in mind, but it's being scaled at 1/4 of an inch, right? Instead of this being 1-to-1, I would have to change this to 1/4 of an inch, right? So I set my model space, I create my text, and then the viewport matches what my model space scale is set to, right? It may sound a little bit complicated. It's a lot to remember, right? But having used AutoCAD forever, this is so much easier than it used to be. Let me just say that. Annotation just in general is very cumbersome in AutoCAD, and not having this annotative option was even more cumbersome, right? All right, one thing I want to bring up, so I have show annotation scales down here at the bottom in the Object Snap toolbar. I want to point this out right here, okay? So this little marker, show annotation objects, right? You want to make sure that's turned on. That's going to allow the annotative objects to function, okay? So if you're having, let me just talk about troubleshooting. If you're having troubles with your text, or you're having troubles with something annotative, right? I would say the first thing that I would check is making sure that your annotation objects are going to be shown, right? So making sure that this little scale is blue. The second thing that can be problematic is maybe you forgot to set your model space to the right scale before you generated your text or dimensions, right? I do it all the time. I get moving along, I'm drawing things, and I think, oh, great, I forgot to change my annotation scale, and now my text won't show up in my viewport, okay? It happens. And so AutoCAD has a little, a little option here to help out with that. Add scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes. Okay, so what that means is that you can change this annotation scale, but this will allow these objects to assume the scale that you change it to. So essentially these objects, right, these annotative objects will have more than one scale associated with them. So they will show up in multiple viewports at the right size. Okay, so now when I hover over this text, do you see that I have 2 of those little annotative markers above my cursor? It's because when I changed the annotative scale, it added that to that piece of text. Okay. This is kind of this little lightning bolt. I'm going to click on it and just add it. It's one of those kind of nice things that if you turn on and you're just using a normal workflow, it kind of just saves you. It helps you through the whole process by adding the annotation scale to everything, right? So it helps you in that aspect. It doesn't help you in that if you're trying to very rigidly control how your annotation looks, it doesn't help you with that because it just adds scales to everything, right? But it is good when you're kind of beginning, like you're thinking, I'm going to forget to change the scale. It's not going to work. My visibility, my text won't show up when it needs to. It's kind of a good thing to have turned on, okay? There is a manual way to add annotative scales to objects as well, right? So again, annotative objects, I keep saying it over and over, but it's a really important thing. Annotative objects are tied to scale, right? So if I click on this object and I right click, I have annotative object scale. I can add the current scale. I can delete the current scale. Add or delete scales. This brings up a dialog box where I can add, click add, and add whatever scale I want, right? I could click on one, hold shift, and click all of them, right? So this is kind of the manual way of adding scales to objects, right? Click on it, whoops, click on it, right click, annotative objects, right? We're not going to worry about this. We're going to worry about these first 3. Add the current scale, delete the current scale, or add or delete scales. Okay. Now,
And is that just so that you can see it on the view?
Through the viewport. Yeah, I was just going to do an example of it. One more example just so you can kind of see that difference one more time. Because again, this is, this is not, it's not easy to wrap your head around. So let me show you a graphic example of that. Okay.
So like if you were printing 2 different objects, but you want at different scales, but you wanted the report to show up with the text.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly it. And the whole idea behind this is you're like, well, what does it matter if, what does it matter really? It matters in that, number one, text needs to show, and number two, when it's on paper space, you want your text to be read at the same height, right? That's a pretty big deal. And if you're printing something at an 1/8 inch and something at 1/4 inch, one piece of text would be zoomed at a 48, 1/4 inch would be a 48 zoom scale, and 1/8 inch would be a 96 zoom factor. So one would be half the size of the other. So for the sake of your drawings having continuously sized text when it's printed, that's why this is really important, right? So if you look at all these drawings over here, well, these are kind of small. Can you get a floor plan up here? This is a good example. You guys, it's a little small, but you can see that all of this text, right, the title is one size, and the text underneath is a secondary size, right? But it's all consistent, right? And if you look here, the same thing. And I want to find the floor plan. These are kind of small, but you'll see here, like on the floor plan, all of these are all the same height. And if we had two different viewports, you'd still want all of these to be all consistently the same height, right? So it's easily read. So let's do a graphic example here, right? This viewport right here, this one is scaled at 1/4 inch. I'm going to change this to 1/4 inch, right? You guys are going to die. I'm going to delete this out of here. No, right? What is happening? That was my assignment. Okay, I'm going to draw a rectangle at 120 by 120. That's a 10-foot by 10-foot rectangle, right? CO, copy. I'm just going to copy this one next door. Okay. I'm going to go back to my paper space. Click, click. Here's object, well, I hope it's object 1. Yeah, there's object number 1. Click, click over here. Here is object number 2. Right? Click, click. This object is scaled at 1/4 inch. Let's see. Okay. This object is scaled at 1/8 inch. Right? Half the size. Okay? But we want the text for both of them to read the same when it's printed. So I'm going to go back in here into model space. I'm going to come up to my annotate menu, right? This is the process you would follow if you were putting text on a floor plan, right? Or an elevation or a section. I would choose the type of font I wanted to use. I'm going to choose Arial 1/8 inch. I'm going to set my annotation scale to 1/4. Okay. I'm going to type in text, enter, justify, enter, MC, middle center, enter. Click. Rectangle number 1, enter, enter. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing over here. But I'm going to change this to 1/8 inch. Oh, tricky. Okay. This one has 2 annotative scales assigned to it. Hold on. Let's remove that. Did you notice how when I changed the annotative scale that it jumped that text by double, right? Let's do that one more time. So this right here, do you see I have 2 little annotative markers? That was a good illustration. It was a mistake, but it was a good illustration, right? So this piece of text right here, when I look at it, it has 1/8 and 1/4 assigned to it. Okay, so if I change the annotative scale of model space from 1/8 to 1/4, that text recognizes that change doubly, right? It's magic. That is magic, people, right there. That would have required a whole new text style back in the day. But, well, hold on. Let me step back. So because both of these have 2 annotative scales assigned to them, you're able to view it in 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch scale and 1/8 inch, right? And they're both the same size, okay? Which is really nice. If I click on this one and I right click and I say edit annotative scale, add or delete scales, and I delete out the 1/4 inch, delete, okay, right? And I go back to my layout here. Do you notice now, because I deleted the 1/4 inch scale and this viewport is scaled at 1/4 inch, it's not visible anymore, right? If I change this to 1/8 inch, which matches our annotative scale, it appears, right? Okay, it's kind of like a little game, right? It is convenient, I will say, you know, to right click on here and just to say annotative object scale, add or delete scales, and to add a bunch of them, right? So that no matter where you place the text, it's visible in a viewport, right? Where again, it's inconvenient if you're doing like an enlarged plan and you want to filter it per scale, that's where you're gonna run into problems if you have every scale associated with a piece of text, okay? Does this somewhat make sense to everybody following so far? Okay, good, good, good. All right. So, let's see here. We should do a little drawing assignment, I think. And we'll add some text. Let's draw this little assignment, but maybe we should take a little break. Should we take a little break? Yeah. Some people are, yes. No. We'll say like five minutes or so. Let's take a little break. Okay. Dive into the next topic. All right. I'm gonna fill up my cup here. Brian's gonna be an expert at doing AutoCAD today. So soothing. I love drafting. It's so soothing. It's you were right there. Some days I just love to sit there and draft away. Yeah, it's so funny. It clears the mind and just when it flows, it's great.
I don't think they're like, yeah. But on one of your feedbacks, like I noticed the D-Doji
Yes.
so like I'm kind of like confused on that because I thought I was just doing it automatically. So I guess I'm just not. So.
Right. So you're posting PDF, which is the one you print, and you're not putting the AutoCAD file as well. So just post two of them.
So does it automatically like save two different ones on like the files?
Yes. So
Okay.
so these ones are the blue and yellow. Those are AutoCAD files, right? And you work in that file, you do your drawings, you save, and then when you print the PDF, you Control P, and you print the PDF. And that piece of paper is a PDF like this that you've been posting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I just assumed that it was just automatically doing it, so that's why I wasn't doing it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just assumed all of them.
No, it's good. We're all fingers good. Okay, I'll bring it back to you.
Yeah, we're gonna like work on part of it in class and then we'll finish it like on our own time.
Oh, yeah, that's true. If you're interested, I'll ask. If not, okay. Yeah, I can ask what you mean. That's a wonderful place to work. People are awesome. It's called Applied Geotech.
You did too. It's not focusing. It's not a brain phone. It's true. You've got this. You've got this down, and you spent all that time studying your doctorate. You're dedicated. That's 9 years ago. I get it. I get it. That was when I was 20. Yeah.
So it's crazy.
I'm not taking summer classes, so it doesn't matter. I'm working. I've made that a rule that I need a break every summer. It's not a very smart rule, but if you take one class, and it's only half the summer. Oh, it's a full summer class, because I know there's half summer. What class is it? That'll be nice though, because you can spend all your time concentrating on that. Yeah, but if it's a harder class, it's nice to have more time and energy, concentration towards that one class. Are you good at physics? It's fascinating, but my mind just doesn't work that way. I can do math. Yeah. I registered for a physics class a couple years ago and I walked in and there was the teacher, you could hardly understand him. And he was talking in the lecture and I thought, you know what? I don't have enough time to this topic. No way. And about halfway through the first lecture, 5 or 6 students. So I stuck out for the entire thing, you know, but there's no way. And then I got a teacher the next semester that you just feel bad when that happens because you're like, I want to give you a chance, I know you're a good teacher, but if I could understand you, and if I could understand physics. So, yeah. Not fun. Great. Yeah, it's neat. I think it's awesome. It goes over my head. I don't remember anything from it. It's okay. It was really good to learn. No, that's okay. Work to make coffee. That's usually what she does. I'll go right to make coffee. My work also, because I come straight from work. I'm not leaving for 5 minutes and it's time out. So I'm still in the work past review. Redoing my bathroom, putting a shower in. And it would be really fun to draw it out.
Do you know what MOD text is?
Wow.
No.
I can do it now.
I'm just looking at it, the assignment.
But I did that.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at right now.
So
It's a
proud.
justification assignment.
Those are our projects.
Yeah. Maybe we should make a suggestion.
Yeah, there's a drafting, the drafting position is my work.
There's still some habitat spots open. I was just talking with our club president on Wednesday and Friday, so if you guys want to go. And you can get extra credit for going, so you can count it towards this class if you want to go. But we were just talking. That is something you can put on your resume for like applying to the U, or if you're going to, you're interior design, right? If you're applying to Weber, maybe.
Oh, I'm going
Whatever.
to Dixie.
Are you? Okay. But I mean, that's something really good for scholarship applications and.
Hey, wait, so what is it again? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a Habitat for Humanities build that is being sponsored by the Interior Design and Architecture Clubs. And so you will show up at like 8:30 at the meeting point, and it's from 8:30 to 3, essentially. And it's on, there's one that's on a Wednesday, which would interfere with our class, and I'll excuse you from class if you want to go to that. That's fine.
And then Friday was the other day?
Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Saturday's filled.
Okay.
Oh,
I know.
okay.
I know. I know. So,
Okay.
but it's fun.
I have a question on the text assignment.
Yeah.
What is D-text and M-text?
Okay, so D-text is, sorry, does it say use D-text to edit?
It
There's
says,
two things that could be.
'cause, like it says D-text right here, but then it mentions D-text and M-text.
Okay.
Up in the.
So D-text is gonna be single line text. It used to be called D-text.
Oh,
And so you'll hear the term DD edit. That's an old term for editing DD text, right? So it's just a little bit of an old terminology being used, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. If you do it the way I show you, you'll be fine. Yeah. What's that?
Like how old?
Oh, I haven't heard it for a long time. I would say several years at least, but
Remember ever using it?
yeah, it's been a really long time.
You don't remember ever using it?
D-text?
Yeah, right. Just nod and say.
Yeah. No, I don't remember. It was always single line text for a really long time. So
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you basically just copying word for word onto the assignment? Okay.
yeah, yep. All right. Let's do. So I'm trying to decide. I feel like what we've done is a lot of information. Maybe what we'll do is I'll introduce you to dimensions. Maybe we won't do the drawing assignment today. And then next time we'll meet, we'll talk about the drawing techniques for this one. And we'll talk about fillet and chamfer and ellipse. And that will kind of get us through this right here. So let's do that, okay? All right. So let's start with dimensions. Okay, and I'm just gonna, no, I'll stay in this file for now. Okay. Now, this book is a little bit old. Again, I've talked about it a lot. We're somewhat getting into the idea of updating it and doing a big update on it, actually. It is still very useful for a lot of things, and dimensions especially, because while dimensions aren't really that difficult, they're very involved. Sorry, I'm trying to find it here. Where are you? There we go. I was like, it involves a lot of dialog boxes, so okay. So we're skipping around, it's just a tiny bit. Dimensions is further into the book, but I feel like since we're talking about text, they're very similar in topic, and so I think it's natural just to start doing dimensions right now, okay? You all know what a dimension is, right? A dimension will allow you to put a numeric value graphically on an object in AutoCAD, right? Oh, do you already have yours drawn over there? Did you draw that? Or
There was a file. I just
You
had
found
the
it?
letters, yeah.
Yeah.
okay. We're drawing it in class. I thought you drawn that. I was like, wow, look at that. You're pretty quick. Okay. Well, we were going to draw it in class anyway, so we'll draw it in class. All right. Let's see here, right? So dimensions they consist of about 4 different elements, okay? We have these extension lines. These are the extension lines on dimensions, okay? We have the dimension line, which is this line that goes across here. We have this is what def points is used for. We have a little grip at the end of our dimension here. And then we have our text. So I guess we have 4 elements on a dimension, okay? Now, let's see here. Let me pull that over onto my other page, actually. Okay. Dimensions, AutoCAD's a really great program, and it has a lot of integrity. It's very precise, right? There are some things, though, that when I say they have integrity, they do have integrity. They have dimensional stability, right? But for example, let me show you, this is a command we'll learn in a few weeks. It's called stretch. When I stretch something in AutoCAD, a lot of things have the ability to maybe skew, right? You see that? It kind of skews about, okay? Or if I grab a line if I have a line and I grab it and I want to move it this way, it doesn't, unless ortho is on, stay perfectly straight, right? So although a lot of the geometry in AutoCAD has integrity, it's highly manipulable. You can manipulate it highly manipulatable. Anyway, that's a word, highly manipulable. There's a lot of manipulation that you can do to it, right? And so that tends to make it so that you can skew it very easily or not quite get it precise because there's so many different positions you can put things in, okay? What I really like about dimensions in AutoCAD is that they are very somewhat rigid, right? So when I create dimensions, they're very stable, they're really easy, and it's hard to make a crooked dimension, which I really like, okay? When I am using dimensions, I can find them on the Annotate tab as well, okay? So we have our text right here. We have our Dimension tab right here. And then when we get to it, we have our Leader tab over here, okay? So a couple things about our Dimension tool palette here. If you use this little drop down, this is the same as our text style gallery right here, right? So if I use my drop down, this is where all of my dimension styles are going to appear when I create them, all right? Now, in the old days, back in the old days of AutoCAD, and again, kind of due to the fact that when you have to scale objects, you have to make the text on them larger to then scale down to paper space, right? That whole idea of scaling text, that applies to dimensions because you have text on dimensions, right? So dimensions were one of those things where the way that we used to do it is we used to have 15 or 20 different dimension styles so that, we had a dimension style for every scale that there is out there, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 to 1, 1.5 inches, 3 inches, 6 inches to 1, right? So we would have a bunch of different dimension styles that each had a different size of text, so that when we use that dimension style that was associated with the scale we were using, the text was the right size on the dimension, okay? That was kind of the old way of working. We now have an annotative workflow so that we can create essentially 1, maybe 2, if you want to have a different font or a different text height. But we have the ability now to make 1 or 2 different dimension styles, and AutoCAD, changes the height of the text to fit the scale we're using. Essentially, so nice, right? And that's what's really nice about the annotative quality, right? We have 1 dimension style, and the text flexes depending on the scale we print it at. It's great. So we have several different types of dimensions, And there are really only going to be a couple that we use. We'll start the idea of dimensions today, and we'll finish it next week. Okay, we'll do the drawing assignment, we'll learn a couple commands, and then we'll apply text and dimensions to our drawing exercise on Monday. Okay, we have linear dimensions, right? So this is a linear dimension, and it creates a straight dimension. Regardless of if you're dimensioning an object with an angle, it still creates a straight dimension. We have a line dimension, and it will create a dimension the same orientation as the object it's dimensioning. So if it's at a 45-degree angle, you get a dimension that's tilted at a 45-degree angle. Although with that said, it doesn't skew the dimension. So if it's 4 feet, it's still 4 feet. It's just, you know, the dimension's on an angle. Angular dimensions, they dimension angles. Arc lengths dimension arcs. Radius dimensions a radius. Diameter dimensions a diameter. And we're not going to worry about these last two just yet. So we have our dimension tools. We have kind of a quick dimension tool right here. Okay, this will create, I believe this one creates, now it's kind of slipping my mind. I think it creates the last dimension type you created, right? So if you created an aligned dimension and you click on this, it creates an aligned dimension, right? We have our dimension style. We'll create a dimension style, and this is where you're going to choose to use it, just like text, okay? So what I'd like to do first is I'd like to create a dimension style. So I'm going to click on this little flyout. This is where our dimension style editor is located. Click, just like text, okay? We have a standard dimension style created, and I want to create a new dimension style. So I'm going to click on new. The way that we like to name these dimensions, or we used to, I guess, I was just going to say the old way of going about it, right? I was going to say it's according to scale, because you have 15 different ones and they all correspond to a different scale. It's not the case anymore, right? It's still programmed. We'll call this, you know, what's that? Bob. Dim style Bob. We'll call it that. There you go. So we're going to give it a name, right? You could say the text height on it, but it's not really important in this case. With text styles, it's a little bit more important, right? Because that text is actually going to be an 1/8, a quarter, a half, but we're not really worried about it with this. What is important is that we click on annotative again, and we hit continue. And when we do that, we get into this new dimension style editor here, right? And this dialog box, hey David, can be a bit daunting. But luckily, in our book, and Jeff Plant wrote this book, you get walked through every step, okay? So it might be just a tiny bit different because this is not an annotative dimension style. So there is one main difference, which I'll show you. But the good thing about this is that it shows you how to locate the dimensions, how to create a new one, and then it shows you all of the visual things that need to be changed, right? Picture to picture to picture. So, you know, if you get lost, if you're creating your dimension style and you get lost in it, this is where you'll want to go to you know, follow along and figure it out, right? So if I click on, or sorry, if I want to create it, here's the symbols and arrows dialog or tab. We have the text, the fit, the primary units. It's all in here. Pages and pages of it, right? Okay. This first area of the dialog box shows us what color the lines of our dimension style need to be. So this baseline, right, the dimension line and the extension lines. Generally speaking, I'm going to choose by layer because I want my dimensions to be able to change with whatever layer they're on, which is ANO dimensions, but I may choose one time to make it magenta and another time make it gray or another time make it white. And so I want them to be able to read, have the pen weight associated with the layer they're on. I don't want them to be independent of that, okay? So here's going to be by layer. This one's going to be by layer as well, okay? I'm going to just change those two things here. Some of these little, and let me just make this a little larger. Hold on, let me see if I can get this. There we go, much better. If I had changed this to like cyan, you see that line change to cyan, right? I'm going to choose by layer. If I had chosen red here, the extension line would change to red. We have extend beyond dimension lines. That's going to be if we have a little architectural tick here, okay, which we don't just yet. So I'm going to change. I'm going to set the color of the layers first. Number 2, symbols and arrows. You notice that we have arrows right here at the end of our dimensions. We don't. That's not a typical architectural, or it might be more like, I would say you'd use this dimension style maybe like in engineering, and maybe not even civil engineering, but like mechanical engineering, where you're 3D printing parts or designing parts, right? But we're going to change this to an architectural tick. Okay, so it looks a little bit more typical. Okay, this all looks good. We're going to leave all this alone for now. We're going to go to text. Now, in AutoCAD, it's a very good idea to define your text style first and then to create your dimension, because here where it says what text would you like to use, you can use a drop down and choose the one that you had already defined. So I'm going to choose 1/8 inch Arial. Nope. 3/32. Oh, something is... hold on a second. Let's see what's happening. Got something funny here happening. Oh, it's okay though. Hold on a second. I think this is a, let me try something real quick. I'm a little bit nervous, but I think, yeah, okay. It just tricked me. Do you guys know what's happening? Okay, what's happening here is modify. So what's happening is the text kind of went away and it looks really tiny, right? And the reason it looks really tiny is because essentially we're defining this dimension style for all scales, right? And so it's not showing me a preview of maybe necessarily, like if a 1/2 inch scale would have a larger text than maybe, you know, an 1/8 inch. It's not showing me a big text height because it's representing all. It's giving me a kind of a generic preview here. But you notice when I created it, it created the text height the right size right here, okay? I don't want my text to be 3/32 though. I want it to be different. So I'm going to change this to, yeah, 1/8. Okay. All right, so Arial 1/8, I choose my text style. We're going to leave the text color. I'm going to change that to by layer. Now I want my text placement to be above my dimension line, and I want it, let's see, vertical above, horizontal, centered, aligned with dimension line. That's the setting I was looking for. So the text was in the center of that line, and by clicking on aligned with dimension line, it moved it just above it. That's what I was looking for. Okay. Between that. You see that? So if I change this back to standard so you can see what's happening, right? So if I change this to, and let's make this, to make it a little bit smaller. So if I change this to horizontal, you see how it intersects that line as opposed to being above it. Yeah, which we don't like. Okay. So here's the major difference between annotative dimensions and non-annotative dimensions, and that is this scale right here. So this, because our book is a little bit outdated, although it's really informational, it is about outdated. And right here, right, a big point is made to say use overall scale of, and this is where you would say, hey, 1/4 inch has a scale factor of 48, so I'm going to put 48 in there. 1/8 inch has a scale factor of 96. So if this is a dimension style I'll use for an 1/8 inch, I'll type in 96 right there, right? And so because we are using annotative, which is going to make that height definition by itself now, we don't put anything there. And in fact, because we have annotative checked, you see how it grays it out. Okay, so we're going to leave all this alone. We are going to make sure we're annotative. Our primary units, we want to make sure those are architectural. The precision is a 32nd. This all looks good. We're not going to worry about alternate units or tolerances, and we're going to hit OK. And I'm going to hit close. Okay. So by doing that, by kind of defining all those dimension dialog boxes, I created a dimension style. And now that dimension style, when I want to create a dimension, it's there for me to use. Okay. If I want to edit that dimension style, I would just click on this little flyout, click on dimension Bob, right? Modify, and I would change anything that needed to be modified. Okay. Again, dimensions are not hard. They're just involved in their definition, right? But the good thing about dimensions is that when you change a setting, it previews on the screen. And so you can look at it and say, oh, hey, wait a minute. I don't want a dot right there. That's not right. Oh, I want an architectural tick, right? So it's easily previewed so that you know if you're doing something right or wrong, okay? So I'm going to hit OK, close. And now I'm going to dimension. Okay, I'm going to click on whatever dimension type I want to use. Let's click on a linear. Click. Down here at the command line, it says specify the first point you want to dimension. And I'm going to snap to the top of this. Click. Click. Move in the direction I want to go. Click. Which part? The create the dimension. So I came up here to the annotate tab. Yep, I clicked on linear right there. And I clicked on the first point I wanted to dimension. You see it snapped. Click. Second one, click. Move in the direction I want to go. Click again. 3 clicks. Did that work? And you have dimensions. Okay.
So it automatically measures.
Yeah. It's nice, right? Yeah. And again, they're really stable, right? So if I had accidentally put it in the wrong spot, right, this little grip down here is where it measures from. So from this point to that grip point. Okay. So I could click on that and I could drag it to the midpoint, click, and it changes it to 5 feet. So that number is automatically read. Okay. It's very accurate. And as you saw, I can grab one little point here, click and drag, and all of these lines remain straight, which is not what happens generally, right? If I have a line out here and I click on it and I drag the end, it's kind of all over the place, right? But the dimension here, click, I click and drag it out, click again, there it is.
Question. My text is showing as pretty small.
Okay.
I did notice I was at a 1-to-1.
Yes.
And when I changed that to 1 8 equals 1 foot, it made it ginormous for us.
Right.
So I'm not sure what went on. Yeah.
It's really dependent. So this is dependent upon what you're printing at. Okay. And so if I change this, and I have this little lightning bolt on, which means that if I change this scale right here, it adds it to the dimension style or any annotative objects on my screen, right? So that's why they're changing as I move through this. But if I click on 1-to-1, tiny, 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 tiny. And that's okay, because if I go to my layout to print in paper space, and I bring up these objects, there's a dimension right there, and I change my scale to 1-to-1, well, the scale is not fitting. Where are they? There they are. Sorry. Let's find it here. It's there. It's just tiny, right? But if I change my scale to 1-to-1, it's the right size, right? I'm going to create another one over here to the side just so you can see that it works. MV, enter. I'm going to grab this thing right here, right? So, and I'm going to scale this viewport. I'm hoping I can visually see it on the screen. But if I grab this viewport and I change it to, you know, 1/8, right? You see how they are exactly the same size, so they both printed 1/8 of an inch, even though when I'm in model space, it looks like that, right? So the viewport, in combination with the annotative scale you've chosen, is compensating for that by making it really large when it's, so 1/8 inch has a 96 zoom factor, so it's being zoomed in and out 96 times when you scale it, right? 1:1 has a 1 scale factor. So the 1 scale factor, it's not even zooming. It's just like viewing it at a 1:1 scale. So the text can be really small. It's going to be 1/8 of an inch because it doesn't have to zoom in and out, right? But the 1/8 inch scale has to zoom. It has to zoom in or out, right? 96 times to get it to the right scale.
Okay.
So this can be viewed at that tiny scale and look right. And this one has to be really big so that when you zoom in that far, it looks tiny. Does that make sense?
So if it was at a 1/8 scale, it has to look bigger on the model space
Right.
versus a 1:1 scale.
Yeah. Because
1:1 is already
you're not zooming into 1:1 to view it.
of an inch on model space.
Yeah. So 1:1, right? I zoom in here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I measure this is for everybody else too, but if I DIST distance, if I measure this, right, it is 1/8 of an inch because it's at 1:1 scale. We're not zooming in or out to print that, right? But if I go to 1/8 inch, right, and I measure that, same text, because the zoom factor for 1/8 inch is 96 times, it is 1 foot 9 and 9/32, right? How much bigger is that? 96 times? I bet so. It's a tricky concept, right? But the system, you can, without even understanding it, just trust the system does work. The system works, right? And it's wonderful for annotation. But the whole point is that you want these pieces of text, regardless of how big they are in model space, you want them to be viewed the same in paper space, right? Whether they're 1/8 inch or 1/2 inch scale, you want them to be viewed the same in model space, okay? Okay, you guys look like you're adequately full of information today. So on Monday, here's what we'll do. Finish the text assignment. There's the text assignment posted, right? You're creating some text. We will be drawing that little bathroom assignment in class on Monday. There are a few drawing commands we'll talk about, but I want to go through drawing an actual, it's a bathroom, right? But we're going to draw it so that we can draw some architecture, use all of our commands together, right? Add some text, add some dimensions. We'll print it, and hopefully that will kind of bring all of the knowledge will be brought together at that point, right? Okay. Any questions? Okay.